Hey guys, thanks for joining me on Tanks and Fish today. Today I have a video on Amazon swords. They are some of my favorite plants, so I want to do a quick how-to guide on taking care of them in your tanks. Before we get started though, do me a favor, hit that like and subscribe, leave any comments below after the video. I would definitely thank you so much for that. Let's get into the video here. What we want to talk about first is when you're selecting your Amazon sword at the shop. What you want to look at is the leaves of the plant. That's the biggest thing, along with the root system. When you're selecting a plant, you want to make sure the leaves look healthy. If you see any browning, any yellowing pinholes on the leaf, that plant is already damaged. It's already suffering from nutrient deficiencies. So you want to make sure that you're not bringing home a problem that you might not succeed at. If you're already an expert at plants, hey, this might not be a big challenge for you. You'll be able to bring it to health. But if you don't know how to take care of them, or you've never have before, just go ahead and look at the leaves. Make sure they're all nice and green and no damages to the leaves. Make sure they're all intact. The root system, you want to make sure it's a good, healthy root system. Let's get into a closer lookup of the Amazon sword here behind me, and we'll go through some of the parameters and requirements for it. Alright, so here's one of my Amazon swords. Apologize for the glare. Hope it won't be too much of a eyesore here for you. But getting into the requirements for an Amazon sword, the temperature ranges, it can take anywhere from 70 to about, I'd say 80 to 85. Pushing it to 85 is kind of already on the dangerous side. I've seen a couple of them melt kind of towards that temperature range on my end. But my usual temperature I'd prefer to keep them at is about 77, 78. In my tanks, especially since I mostly keep them with guppies, so that's the perfect temperature that I like to keep them at, and they thrive really well for me. The pHs, they can take anywhere from 6.5 to 7.5. This tank here, it's actually at 7.5 for the pH, and it does absolutely well in this pH. I've also kept them with neon tetras where the pH is about a 6.3, and I've never had any issues with it that low, but I have noticed that it doesn't grow as beautiful as it would in higher pHs. Light, these can actually take any light source that you give them and they will grow healthy for you. How well they grow, that depends on how much light you put on them. They will grow in low light situations, and they'll be great, but they won't thrive and they won't spread as quickly as if you're putting them in high light with CO2 and fertilizers. So you can pretty much use them in any tank space, but just be aware they will grow to their environment. So the more light, the more nutrients, CO2, the healthier, the bigger, the more colorful it will be for you, but it will still look great in a low light situation. Height, it can get up to 20 inches. I've personally seen it grow to 20 inches, and I've had to trim it back. So depending on the tank size you're going to put it in, you always want to keep an eye on it to make sure it's actually fitting in the tank. You can keep it in smaller tanks, but it's going to require a lot of pruning of the leaves. You're going to have to be cutting it back quite often. This here's a 20 gallon. As you can see, these leaves already pretty much reach the top. Usually about this size, I like to trim down some of the bigger leaves to allow some of the smaller leaves to grow. When you first purchase these plants, the Amazon sword is usually a very rooted plant. It grows heavy roots under the substrate, so when you first purchase one and put it in your tank, you're not going to see immediate growth on these. You're going to have to wait a couple of weeks for that root system to really develop underneath that gravel before you actually start seeing good leaf development up top. So keep that in mind when buying one. Since they are heavy roots plants, you are going to need to feed them at the roots. They can take nutrients through the water column, but you always want to use root tabs for the roots. That's where the majority of their nutrients they absorb is through the roots. So you got to make sure you're putting some root tabs in there so they can grow. Going back to the CO2, you don't necessarily need CO2 for these, but CO2 will benefit them. What happens when this plant grows too big, or you start seeing some of the older leaves pretty much decaying? What you want to do is just trim them off. This plant usually holds on to its leaves for quite a while, but down here, if you can see, one of the leaves for some reason is dying on me. What you want to do when you notice that is you want to just trim it as close as you can to the base of the plant. That way the plant doesn't waste energy trying to rebuild that leaf. That way it can focus its energy on all the other leaves that it has here. When you look through it, whenever you do your water changes or whatever, if you notice something that you don't like on the leaves, always trim them, but always make sure that you are paying attention to any possible deficiencies it might have. If you see the browning of the leaves, yellowing, pinholes, you want to make sure you're addressing those concerns before you start just trimming off things you don't like. Always make sure you're giving it the proper nutrients it needs. Propagating these plants is actually really easy. You got to wait for these plants to actually mature a bit before they start sending out runners. They'll either send them through the gravel, and somewhere in your tank you'll see a new Amazon pop up. As you can tell right here, this is a plant that's actually propagating right now. It sent out a runner. Instead of sending it through the gravel, it actually sent it up into the water column. I usually wait probably a couple of weeks till this plant gets a little big and develops a good root system. As you can tell, the roots kind of going all over the place. I wait till it gets a good root system. That way when I transplant it, it has a good chance of surviving. So you always want to look at that, and you always want to cut it off the mother plant. Don't let it just grow attached to that runner. Just try to clip it, that way that mother plant can actually start developing itself more and spreading more. What you want to do when you're ready to trim and propagate this plant is you want to look at the plant itself and try to go near the base without cutting the root system. As you can tell here, where the root system is, you got the leaves down here and a good root system growing. You don't want to damage any of that root system, so you always want to try to cut it to, you know, maybe a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch below that root system, just to make sure you're not trimming anything that could potentially damage the plant. So here we'll show you how to actually trim that down, and just grab it and just right about there, if you can see that, you do a swift trim and you got yourself a new plant here. All the roots intact, the leaves look great and healthy. So now all we need to do is just replant it. Alright guys, hopefully this video helped you at least get a good grasp of what you need for this Amazon sword. I'll hope to bring you more videos on more plants, more fish, and more tanks in the near future. If you do like anything you saw or heard here today, please subscribe, leave a comment below, and like the video. I always look forward to reading any comments you guys leave. Thank you guys, and we'll see you guys on the next one.